People think that 1 + 1 + 1 = 4, but really sometimes equals 2.5. I'm not saying that death to Silicon Valley. I think San Francisco and Silicon Valley are going to be just fine. And it's possible to have both, not either or. I had definitely leadership experience, and I thought that probably leadership and management were the same thing, and they're not.
The world of design has been very siloed, but Figma has transformed that world into a collaborative one. Today, join me as I talk with Dylan Field, CEO co-founder of Figma. He shares his journey building the product and how he dropped out of college to build a $2 billion company. I am also excited to have with us YML's Chief Creative Officer, Stephen Clements. At YML, we use Figma across all disciplines for the end-to-end experience. And it has really helped us to increase our speed and collaboration, not just within our teams, but also with our clients. Let's jump in. Dylan, very, very excited to host you today.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here. This is going to be fun.
Yes. The day I really wanted to have you on the podcast was when our design team was fighting with our CFO. We need Figma, like the next version, because it's not just collaboration inside YML.
Yep.
It's actually what we use to collaborate with our clients too. So it's a tool we love. And, Stephen can tell you more about it, later in the podcast. And he has a lot of questions for you as well. So,
I'm sure some feedback too. So I'm looking forward to all of it.
Absolutely. I would love to know, for our guests, like what Figma is.
Yeah, for sure. So Figma is a design platform, and we're trying to make it so that you can go all the way from the initial brainstorm of an idea all the way to the design of it, and really thinking through how should it work? What's the prototype like? How do you present it? How do you communicate with stakeholders? How do you work collaboratively with people to be able to create the thing? All the way to production. How do I get this into code and make it real? And we're trying to support people all along that journey. And yeah, we started the company back in August 2012. So it's been almost 9 years, which is wild, and have a lot of amazing customers around the world. One of the best parts of the business is that it's extremely international, and it's very diverse in terms of customer makeup, everything from individuals and freelancers to some of the largest corporations on earth. So we're just feel very fortunate every day to get to work on this problem.
Yeah, absolutely. And at YML, I can tell you, Dylan, that Figma is one of the reasons that we have literally doubled our team size.
Wow.
So now we are like close to 450, and we have worked very effectively, across different time zones, different even countries, all that. So thanks to you.
Thank you. That's awesome. What are some of the use cases you use it for?
Stephen.
Yeah, you nailed it. We use it for the end-to-end design process. I think we've probably been on Figma for 3 or 4 years now, and I say to people, I think it's improved our productivity, our velocity, like 1 to 2x more than it was. It's like almost doubled, tripled our productivity.
That's awesome.
It's just so. It's so much easier to collaborate at speed and at scale when everyone is in the same file doing it together, rather than off on their island, kind of creating something that may be way off brief. But you asked a bit about feedback. I'd love to know about this. Like we find it to be an amazing cultural tool for our design team. Like our community, internal design team community, I don't think has ever been stronger, and I think Figma being kind of the predominant tool we use is the reason for that. Is that something you've been hearing a lot about culture and community and, that kind of softer side of design, which was unexpected for us, but yeah, I was curious about that.
Totally. It's interesting because I think there's many forces at play here. One is the way that people work is changing. We're becoming more collaborative, more transparent. And I think that's echoed across all of our tools. And maybe those tools then impact the culture and there's a feedback loop. So perhaps the demand becomes larger because of sort of just generational shifts. The tools meet the demand, the tools then further reinforce that. But yeah, I think that we've seen that for a lot of customers, and we've also seen the reverse too. But I think that the macro shift that we're seeing is towards more transparency, more collaboration, and I think more community, to your point, not just outside of your organization, but within your organization. How do you create a community amongst your people, whether that's the design team or even beyond the design team? Because I think that what's starting to happen is that design is becoming more important than ever. We're seeing design really, I'm sure you see this every day with your clients, but I think just the amount of recognition and importance placed in design is just fundamentally different than it was 10 years ago when we started Figma.
Yeah.
And I think that in 10 years from now, it'll be fundamentally different as well.
Yeah.
Like I really think this is the decade of design. And in the same way that the last decade was about engineers and building, I think now it's about building the right thing, building it in a way that people will really appreciate, with quality, with respect, with integrity. And I think that translates into the products and the experiences that we build.
Yeah, I love, Dylan, the idea behind Figma is the tool, not exclusively for designers. It's like I collaborate in it, product managers collaborate in it, and I don't have any special design skills, right? Like when you look at Adobe suite of products, you actually need to be pretty good to operate in it, you know? And that's my favorite part.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that we really focus on is how do we create sort of that staircase of that, where the first step is, you know, anyone can take it. That's not to say that you're going to be like able to do all the most complex things in the tool right away. That will take some time. But if we can make it as approachable as possible, if we can make it really intuitive, then more people are able to get started. And then from there, they can graduate up with their mastery to get to the point where they are able to be more dangerous, if you will.
Yeah. Yeah. No, absolutely. So let's go back all the way, Dylan. Like where did you grow up? How was childhood? And, you know, if you can just fast forward until Brown, you joined Brown.
Yeah, no, I grew up in Sonoma County, which is I grew up in Pengrove, which is maybe an hour and a half or so north of San Francisco.
Mm-hmm.
And it was an amazing childhood. I was very, very lucky and fortunate. I had two loving parents. They were not technical, but they really supported me in exploring technology and just making things. And I actually was really interested in acting as a kid. So I did some acting before I had puberty, and then I stopped getting roles. and then I switched over more to computers and math as like my main interest. And I had a great high school experience where I got to take a bunch of university classes, local university, they had a special program set up, and did a lot of robotics as well as web design and sort of like just a lot of PHP applications, you know, so I probably have some like really bad habits somewhere because of that. And then, I ended up going to Brown. I had found out about Brown through people I met through O'Reilly Media, which is where I interned in high school. There at Sebastopol, which was like half an hour away. My dad was very kind to him, and also my friend's dad who got me the internship. We would kind of do a carpool thing, and they were super awesome to do that. And through that, met a lot of people in tech, started to develop an interest in entrepreneurship and just building companies, and also found Brown through there. That's how I kind of like got interested in the school. Ended up, fast forwarding, ended up studying computer science and math at Brown, and met my co-founder there, Evan. He's absolutely amazing. He's my TA, and
nice.
He's just one of the, I think we'll look back at him in 100 years as like one of our generation's most brilliant people. He is so prolific and does so much, and just his brain is, he's got several of them, more than you and me.
Yeah.
Fun fact, his nickname in middle school was apparently Computer Jesus. So
wow.
I think it's just like one of those lessons of like, if you really focus on your craft, 10 plus hours a day, every day, and it's your passion, you live and breathe it, you can do unbelievable things. That's definitely the case for Evan.
Yeah.
Anyway, so met Evan at Brown, was so impressed by him. And we started talking about starting a company together, and then eventually came out of Figma.
So which year was it when you started with the Teal Fellowship?
So I started the Teal Fellowship in 2012.
Okay.
And so August 2012 is when we started Figma, and when the fellowship started. I got it back in, June or May or something like that. And then we actually explored for like 9 months. We didn't know what we were doing at first. We knew we wanted to do creative tools. We knew we wanted to do something with WebGL. I was excited about design. Evan was excited about that as well, but we also wanted to explore some stuff around computational photography, photo editing, and also consumer use cases, frankly. We were trying to figure out I think if you think back to that time, Lean startup was really big. All the popular advice in the Valley was like, you got to launch something, you got to get out in front of people as fast as you can, then iterate. And we're looking at all these problems ahead of us. And we're like, wow, these are going to take years. Like, we can't wait years. So we built a meme generator, and meme generator is like a moment where I think we realized, okay, this sort of flash in the pan stuff isn't going to work for us. Like, we didn't even launch it. We didn't want to support it. It was a great meme generator for the time. Like, there were not any good meme generators out there, but after a week working on it, and we kind of built it out, and we were ready to launch, and we're like, this is why did I drop out of Brown for this? Evan's like, I'm ready to leave, maybe I'll just go to Adobe or something. We were done. So instead we then started working on sort of longer term projects, first a photo editor, and then eventually we became Figma. But a lot of the stuff we built, even with the meme generator, a lot of the stuff we built was actually usable later on. Like, the meme generator code was our first version of text rendering in Figma. So it wasn't all for nothing, which was good.
Okay. So when was that pivot from meme generator to, something else, to Figma? Like, what was that time frame?
August 2012, we started. From like August 2012 to maybe like November, December of 2012, we were working on various sort of one-offs that we thought would unite, but we weren't sure how to unite them. And then starting December to maybe March or so, we were working on more photo editing and compositional photography, and we built out a sort of like a Lightroom in the browser experience, which was, very polished. I was still very proud of it and some of the things we did there. And then from there, we went and built an interface design tool, and kind of like, it took a while before we labeled it as such, but we knew we wanted to build a design tool. And we're trying to figure out, like, if you think about Photoshop in the browser, that was sort of I think the phrase we're using for the time, and Photoshop does so many things. And so we're kind of like unpacking what was our priority of which cases and use cases we want to solve first. And interface design was one of the top ones. And then we realized that was like an entire product, and it's better to be unbundled there and to not have it be, simplicity's power. And I don't know if you ever read this essay called None Such Beast, and it's on Stevie's Drunken Blog Rants, great blog, and basically talks about how, people think that 1 + 1 + 1 = 4, but really sometimes equals 2.5. And the more things you pack into software, sometimes the more complex it becomes, and the more that you have this irreducible complexity, and different things intersect with each other, and that became something that was the foundational principle for us of trying to make sure we tease apart, the sort of boundaries of a tool, rather than just trying to stuff everything in.
Yeah. And when did you know, like, okay, now, the whole design tool in the browser is the product, right? Why not pivot away from it? What were the indication where you felt this is a real business?
We were building it, and I think that we started to see just people get really excited. Like, most people didn't get it at first, or they thought it was impossible. Most people thought it was impossible, to the degree where I was recruiting people, and I'd have to like show up, open my laptop before I barely said a word, and show them it works. Before, otherwise they just like dismiss it. If I talk for an hour or something, people would go, yeah, it sounds like bullshit. And I think that other people thought, okay, well, that's fine, but like, I don't need the collaboration. I don't need it to be in the cloud. Why would I want that? And there's a few people that were just right away went, oh my gosh, this is what I've been waiting for. And can you do like all these things? Like, I remember one person who's still a friend of mine and someone I really admire did a user testing session with me, and maybe probably end of 2013, early 2014, somewhere around there. And the tool at that point was so rough. Like, if you entered text, it was just incredibly slow, and you couldn't actually really complete tasks in a performant way. And despite this, so I brought a bottle of wine to the user study, and we kind of drank the wine. He did the user study because I knew it was going to take a while. And afterwards, like 2 days later, he sent me like a 12-page doc on, here are all the things that I want you to do. And when you see that kind of level of user feedback and people engaging that much, that's what I think really special, and you're onto something.
Yeah.
And you skate to where that's going.
Yeah, I think the worst is when people just completely ignore your product.
Yeah.
Either they should hate it or they should love it,
That's right. And we get a lot of hate and a lot of love in the early days. Both.
That's great.
Yeah, I'd like to just piggyback on that, because I heard somewhere that when you had this idea for a multiplayer design tool, that you did some research, or you touched on this. You asked some people, looking at what I'm doing in my design files, and hindsight is 2020. But frankly, I probably would have said the same thing like five, 6 years ago. So What gave you what made you brave enough to ignore that feedback? Were you getting other feedback that led you in a certain direction? Yeah. What was the impetus there?
Yeah, I think it ended up seeming obvious. At first we thought, okay, well, we're not sure we can prioritize this. It'll take a long time to build. So we actually built it without multiplayer. And then we tried to use it and it didn't really work, because if you're in one tab and someone else is in the same file and they save and your thing reloads, it sucks. And so it became very clear very quickly the expectation of the medium of being in the browser, being on the web and in the cloud is such that you really need to have this multiplayer experience. And so then we're like, okay, all in, let's do it. It's not going to work otherwise. And we weren't sure how much it would be used at first. We thought maybe it's like a, one-off thing and it's kind of like a nice thing to have, but it feels good when it's there. And what ended up happening was it became a very defining part of the experience and a must-have.
And how, like when I look at these Adobe tools, right, they need so much power in your computer. So clearly like collaboration is power intensive, right? So how did you kind of architected the product which kind of works seamlessly across so many people and it's not a power hog?
Yeah, I think that, so just from a technical standpoint, the collaboration sort of multiplayer aspect is not really the power hog it's not the computational intensive part. That's more network bound, and you really have to just be able to send the deltas in a smart way and be able to replay them in another person's computer. I think what's more computationally intensive is just the graphics part and being able to render efficiently and, not to be able to really think through the memory requirements in a robust way. And that required a lot of engineering. We have a great team, but yeah, some of our early folks were people that had built game engines especially, and had been really used to how do you actually work with the GPU, be able to make these things efficient and be able to treat memory very preciously. And we also had the advantage of working with some very new technologies that we'd bet on early, and those bets ended up being prescient. And so, for example, we built on Inscription early on, and then eventually WebAssembly as well, which is a way to basically use C++ to compile to JavaScript. And when you do that, it means that you're able to have like a very large code base and be very organized about it, but also be very granular about your memory efficiency and whatnot.
I see. And what was the moment when you got the first 1,000 users, right? Like, and how did you solve the whole distribution challenge?
Yeah, well, when we went to launch finally, it was December of 2015 was the target launch date. And I remember talking with our board maybe 4 or 5 months before that, and like, yeah, well, let's do this kind of quiet launch. Like, we just want to see if people like it. And the board went, no, I think you should do a big launch. Like, they didn't give me any more guidance than just like, do it big, do it right. And I'm like, okay. So we went and we made a whole new plan. We really went as big as possible with the launch and really try to get our messaging down too. I think it's so, especially when we've worked on something for so long, like at that point, it'd been over 3 years that we'd worked on Figma in silence and stealth mode. And there's so many components of it. We're like, okay, what do we stress? We stress the vector features. Do we stress like constraints, or is it more about multiplayer? Like, we don't really know. Multiplayer didn't actually work yet even. And so we ended up figuring out our messaging strategy, but it took a long time. And the way that I like to do that actually is I like to think about like messaging hierarchies. So what's your top line message? And then sort of what are the supporting messages below that? And I think being really focused on that and then figuring out how that affects all other collateral for the launch is important, because otherwise it's like people won't understand what you're doing. Thankfully, it ended up working, and we got a lot of spread online, and very quickly, people were checking it out, and we had this huge wait list actually of people that wanted to get into the closed beta. Then it was really interesting because we didn't know how to actually take people from that wait list and put them in, and how many to put in at the same time. And we found that over time, as the longer we waited, we could probably correct this, but we didn't really think about it. We basically like progressively every week let people in, watch the metrics, were people converting better, worse, what do we need to do? And from there, we were able to kind of like iterate into building the tool to where it is now.
Okay. When you launched, right, like in December of 2012, right? How big was the team then?
Well, December of 2015.
2015, sorry. 2015. Yeah.
I think roughly a dozen people, plus or minus, maybe 13, 14.
And you must have raised like a small round by then, right?
We raised 2 rounds. So we raised our seed round in June 2013. And then based on the progress since then, we raised an A round in November of 2014 as well.
Okay.
And so that was the A round was from John Lilly, who actually rejected us in our seed round. And Greylock was very helpful too in hiring and just kind of like thinking through how to grow the team.
Got it.
As was Index, our seed funding.
Got it. And what was the process of convincing, the first few members to join you, right? It's always like, people are always skeptical, right? Like, I think my experience has been like, even convincing Steven to join me was a process. It took me a few years before like he finally said yes.
I have the email receipts to prove it.
I actually sent Steven an email in 2011-12 and he declined politely. Then we got back in touch like in 15, 16. We kept in touch and then finally he said yes, So I would love to know, Dylan, like getting the first few members onboarded, what was, that process? And what were some of the biggest hires for you?
Yeah. What's funny you mentioned about Steven, because our design leader, Noah, he also took forever to bring on board. It was like 3 years or something. And I think that what was interesting too was some of the people we worked on early. And I remember I was actually just looking at an email thread from 2014 of someone that we hired in 2021. So it wasn't like we were strictly in touch that entire time for 7 years, but I think it takes a while sometimes for some of the best people in the world. But yeah, I think the early folks that joined us were really visionary. They saw what we were trying to do. They believed in what the problem we're trying to solve and how we wanted to solve it. And they had a lot of perspective on it, honestly. It was a really awesome group of people, and I'm still in touch with many of them. Not all of them are at Figma anymore, but it was really special to be able to assemble that group together. And I think it's also a pretty different profile of folks than it is now, maybe in some ways, but also the same in other ways. Like we had an intern come back recently who had interned with us in like 2014 or 15 or something like that. And she's like, wow, the culture feels exactly the same as it was when we were like 20 people, which I thought was wild, given that we're now gone through COVID, we've grown, over 10x and the team is totally different. So yeah, I think in terms of how to get those people early on, whatever you can do is what you got to do. I don't know what else to say. There's no pattern, but we, I just really respect all those folks that joined us early because there was nothing there. And I was coming from being an intern, I was an experienced leader and they really believed in me and supported me as well.
You mentioned COVID then, Dylan. I'm really interested. Did you see a massive spike in adoption of Figma during COVID? Was that a big influence or were you kind of tracking to what you expected from growth?
It's probably a little bit higher than expected. And it's hard to know if that was due to COVID or due to just the business in general. But I think what we did see a spike in was the usage on the platform. We saw a lot more hours spent in Figma. And I think the reason for that is people are not so great with work-life balance during COVID. We're all in front of our computers all the time and just really focused on doing whatever it is we're doing. And I don't think it's necessarily healthy, but we started seeing people use the platform just so much more and so many more hours in the week.
Yeah, I bet there's some really interesting data there, like exactly what sort of time frames are people keeping, work hours, what sort of events trigger kind of work splurges, all of that. I think that'd be really interesting.
Yeah, it's also different culturally.
Yeah. Something I'm interested in, there's been a really dramatic rise and fall, if you will, of some of the big players in this kind of digital product design space. Obviously, Adobe being the legacy company, Sketch, InVision, you've gobbled them all up in some ways. In some ways, or their users.
I don't know about that.
It's been such a lot of disruption. I was wondering, like, what are you most excited about Figma's future? And if you don't mind, is there anything that scares you as well?
Sure. Well, I guess first on the competitive point, I actually think that there's a ton of people that are fans of our competitors, and that's great. Like, I think it's awesome to have that competition in the space. It pushes us to be better, and we learn a lot from it and from what people need in the different workflows out there. So I'm thankful, and I've met the competitors. They're all amazing people, honestly. So it's really cool for all of us to be working towards this vision of making design accessible to more people. I would say that in terms of the future and what scares me, I think most of what scares me is just in terms of the company building side of it. We're rapidly expanding right now, which is thrilling and wonderful. And I feel very blessed to be part of that and to have this experience. But also, there's a lot of unknowns, and to try to make sure that we are building a great culture through that rapid expansion is a huge challenge, and it's easy to mess up. And so that's something that I keeps me up at night.
Yeah,
for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And by the way, we love FigJam. We've been
thank you.
Yeah, that's an awesome product, and it's only been out for a short while, so we're getting the design team are probably fully up to speed now. But you mentioned as well, it's an opportunity to bring others into the process that is design.
Exactly.
I love that we've consolidated our tool set down to one thing, and it's great that we've now got a brainstorming tool. That is FigJam. Are you seeing a lot of adoption now from product managers, project managers, like content strategy people? Like, kind of what are you seeing in terms of users that's different?
Yeah, it's been interesting because we thought that FigJam would be sort of just for the beginning of the design process with designers. And like you said, it's really bringing in the entire team. So everyone from engineers to product managers to copywriters to marketing to sales to support. I mean, it's really everyone that's coming into it and finding uses for it. And I think also part of it is that it's free this year. And so, there's no reason not to use it versus others. But I think also people really just appreciate the simplicity of it and how much it's focused on the use cases of whiteboarding and brainstorming and being generative.
Yeah.
And so I think we've also had a lot of great feedback on just sort of the emotive qualities of the space. So for FigJam, for those who don't know, it's a whiteboarding tool, and we really try to make it so that you can be more human in the space, do things like cursor chat or be able to react with emojis to people or even jump on a voice call. And I think that's sort of that spectrum of humanity in this whiteboard abstracted space. I think it brings a lot of life to things and it makes it much more joyous and lets you be more in the flow as you go in and do this work.
Yeah, that's a great point. Yeah, again, it goes back to that idea of culture building and community building, and some of those features in there, like stickers and the reactions where the hearts and the clapping and stuff float around. That's so cool.
Thank you.
We did something a while ago where we had the design team, 60, 70 people creating a Valentine's Day card in Figma together, everyone.
Oh,
it was quite a monstrosity, but it was also a really, really fun process. And it kind of looked cool as well. It was very clear that 60, 70 people had designed it. But I love that about it. I love that about FigJam, just the cultural element. I can see there being a lot of strength there.
Dylan, how do you stave off the competition, right? Clearly Adobe is the 800-pound gorilla in this space, right? If they come up with something similar, how do you think about that? And how do you compete with, these are the incumbents?
Yeah, I don't know if it's a satisfied answer, but the reality is that we're just very focused on being Figma. And I think one thing we do is kind of like a hack week, but everyone in the company can participate, not just engineers. And you can do things like learning development. You can also do things like refining parts of the product or the company or exploring new areas. And I think that it's interesting because I think even the things that we are shipping now are things that we started exploring through Maker Weeks 2 or 3 years ago. And so we've got quite a pipeline of things that we want to do for Figma. And I haven't had the experience yet where a competitor ships something and we go, wow, we've never even thought about that before. That's wild. Yeah. Now, sometimes we look at it and we go, okay, we would have done it a little differently, or we had a different point of view on it. And maybe someone ships something and we go, okay, that actually pushes the timeline. We have to change our priorities a bit and move a little faster this direction now. But I wouldn't say it's someone ships something and we go, oh, wow, never thought of that before. And we just got to copy that thing. We don't ever do that. That's not our MO.
Yeah. And just switching gears a little bit, right? Clearly, coming out of college, you probably have never managed anyone. So how was that experience from not managing anyone, worked as an intern to building, a massive company now?
Yeah, I thought that I had definitely leadership experience. And I thought that probably leadership and management were the same thing, and they're not. Management is a muscle. It's distinct from leadership. And I definitely had a lot to learn. I'm thankful I've had some amazing mentors and also gotten a lot of great feedback from the people I managed. But honestly, people were very patient with me early on, and it was rough at times. And I think I learned a lot now, but it was trial by fire, and I'm still learning from the people I manage every day.
Yeah. And when you say it was rough, like give us some instances of like what was it like?
Like team was saying, hey, you got to find someone to like come in and help like urgently. And we did. I mean, that was around the time that we hired our first manager, who's we brought in as director of engineering, now as director of product, Sho Kumoto. And I learned a ton from him. He taught me about empowering the team more. He taught me about, we were 3 years in and hadn't shipped yet. It's like, yeah, we got to ship. Oh, okay. We were very close, to be fair, but still, I mean, he really helped us galvanize towards that goal. And I think, it's pure hubris when people don't think they can learn from folks that are reporting into them. And I think you can learn from everyone in your life, not just on management, but on all topics. Whenever I'm in a conversation, I'm going, oh man, I got to do X or Y. I just try to center back on, okay, what can I learn right now?
I'll just share like one of the things early on. So I also never managed anyone before starting YML. And, one of the things early on I struggled with was I would have something in my mind and I would take action, but I wouldn't really give the context to people.
Yep.
And that just like drove people nuts. Like, why is Ashish doing this? And I'm like, I feel very clear in my mind, this is obvious, but I'm not really like speaking about it openly because I kind of avoid like pushback, in any way, right? And I kind of learned that very hard, much later in the process of building.
Yeah, I think it's a really good point, and one that almost all managers and new leaders need to learn is that unpacking. And I think it's not just about what you're doing, but also what you're saying to do. Like if you say, hey, do it this way instead, like that is way less useful than, okay, I see what you're trying to do. And if you're trying to meet that goal, another way to approach it might be this. And here's why I think this, and try and turn to a teaching moment of like, okay, I have this context you might not have. Let me give it to you. And then being very clear about, okay, you have the authority to make a call about what you want to do, or actually this is like a moment for the company where we cannot mess up.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And what was the moment like when you actually, started charging your customers? I'm guessing like the first version was free, like people were using, giving you feedback. What was that moment like? How did you transition?
Yep. So it's 5 years after we started the company.
Okay.
First of all, I don't recommend people wait 3 years to get to launch or 5 years to start charging. It's a bad idea. Don't be like, oh, Figma did it, I should do it too. No, it's a terrible idea. We started charging because our customers told us, please charge us. I was waiting. We had VC funding, money in the bank. I'm like, okay, we can wait to charge and let's just grow and make sure that this is good enough to charge for. No need to rush it. Meanwhile, what became some of our biggest enterprise customers were saying, I cannot advocate for using Figma inside my company until you charge me. Everyone is worried you're going to go out of business. And I'm like, oh, shoot. Okay, we got to start charging. And 6 months later, started charging. So that's what made us start to charge. But I wish we'd done it way earlier, man. Wish we had.
That's pretty interesting. And like now, as you're scaling the company, now I'm guessing all of you are remote during the pandemic. So what is the framework of building culture when you are remote? And what's your strategy of like, assuming we are almost in the post-pandemic era in United States, like what's your idea of going back to work, right?
Yeah, those are two very big questions.
Yeah.
I think the first one around how do you kind of instill and scale culture remote, a lot of reliance on managers, honestly, making sure that people that are leading teams know just kind of like the tool chest that they have available to them in terms of ways to bring their groups together, then also trying to find ways for people to interact across the company. I think that one thing that we found is missing a lot, and I think everyone's found this, is how do you create that cross-team connection and serendipity? One thing we did last December that, I think somewhat worked, somewhat didn't work, was for one of our maker weeks, I divided the company into 4 houses and gave them sort of like Harry Potter, and they had various challenges. Like one challenge was go make your house crest. And another challenge was to do something creative together, and videotape it. The more people that participated, the more points you got. And we had all these different challenges. And what ended up happening was if you got the most points for your house, everyone in your house got a mechanical keyboard that was Figma branded. So very big motivator, obviously, because everyone loves mechanical keyboards. And I think what I found from it was we had some of these like house coffees on Discord in the mornings, and those were somewhat attended, but didn't totally work. Whereas the moments where people were doing something together and getting to meet over shared activity, that really did work actually. And so I think that's one lesson we took away from that is like, how do we create more of these shared activities where people can bond over them in a remote setting? Now, thinking about the transition back to the office, post-pandemic, we're going to be hybrid. If you want to be remote, great, go be remote. You'll be pay localized depending on where you are. If you want to be in the office, that's great too. We ask that you will be there at least 2 days a week. And those 2 days are the same days for everyone.
Yep.
Because again, it's like, how do you create that serendipity? Everyone's going to the office this different 2 days, then no one's going to bump into each other. You're not going to meet random people on the team, which is so much of the benefit of being in the office. And I think that then the question becomes, okay, how do these sort of remote group and the in-office groups, how do they interact? And also, how do you create the same opportunities for people that are remote that folks in the office will have? So for example, one thing I'm thinking about a lot right now is people that are in office, one of the benefits of being in office is these random connections. Those can be helpful for your career. They can be helpful for advancement, for just like gaining context, et cetera.
Yeah.
You don't want to like remove that. That's a huge benefit of the office. You just want to be able to create it as well for people that are remote. So how do you do that in a productive way?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Like we are thinking about it the same way. Like when you're doing Zoom and Slack interactions, it's very deliberate. There is an agenda behind it. You're not just like hanging out and discussing things which, doesn't have a very clear agenda behind it. So it's the same thing we are trying to do. And one of the challenge we are experiencing is like we have hired so many people beyond the Bay Area, and how do we like bring them in during all hands like once in a quarter, or so that they're also connected to everybody, and we're thinking through.
I think our all hands will continue to be remote.
The challenge, what I've seen is when everyone is remote, everyone is on the same level playing field, right? And when everyone is in person, again, the same thing. But when you have like some people in person, some people remote, that's when I think the experience gets like very marginalized.
Yeah. Well, that's why I think it's important to still have those times where everyone can be remote together.
Yeah.
And not just have those two groups diverge. And for what it's worth, I mean, I mentioned the 2 days that are mandatory.
Yeah.
The complement of that is that 3 days a week are optional to be in the office or not. And so whether you're at home or you're in the office, you'll be able to participate in remote activities too. But I think both tracks are really, really important to get right.
I think something you mentioned then about kind of equitability of I mean, let's just say Figma is kind of a tool that creates fosters a sense of diversity and equitability, I think, generally speaking. We can hire people not inside the Bay Area, for example. And I think that leads very much to a new paradigm where tools, products, services are not just being created by Silicon Valley types, and they're being created by a much more national global workforce.
Yep.
Is that something that you're playing into as a company? Do you like, what does the diversity on your team look like?
Yeah, mostly right now we're North America and London and a few folks in Sweden, but I absolutely believe that the future of tech is multi-hub.
Yeah,
It's
absolutely.
not just San Francisco.
Yeah.
It has been that way for a while, by the way. Like even before the pandemic happened, I mean, one of the things I do is I interview for the Teal Fellowship. And as many as, 2 or 3 years ago, it started to see that people were no longer saying, I want to go to San Francisco. It stopped being that way. They wanted to be wherever they're going to be that they can make their business work.
Yeah.
And I think that the dream had changed from like go to SF and start a tech company to start a tech company. I think that now we've seen that accelerate through COVID, and prices in San Francisco have gone down, which is helpful for people, but not enough so that it's at a level where people can just migrate here without thinking about it. And I think, the genie's out of the bottle. We're going to have many hubs. I think that's a good thing for the world. More diversity in location and where people are able to start businesses is great. Then you have to follow it up with infrastructure. How do you get more funding for these places across the world? Because it ends up being very regional, I think, for funding, even if you can hop on a Zoom with somebody. It's for some reason that ends up being the case. How do you make sure that you have great universities and talent pools to pull from? What ends up happening, I think, as I've studied different locations and networks that form around them, is that you need to have exits in those locations in order for people to start investing and have the capital base and angel ecosystem work. Once that works, then the entrepreneurship ecosystem can start happening. And so I think the thing to watch for is in these different hubs and these different locations across the world, what are the ones that have a few big exits? Those are the ones where we're going to see sort of the next Silicon Valley is being formed. And it doesn't mean that, by the way, I'm not saying the death to Silicon Valley. I'm living in San Francisco and I'm calling from San Francisco right now.
Yeah.
I think San Francisco and Silicon Valley are going to be just fine. And it's possible to have both, not either or.
Absolutely. I'm thinking the exact same way, right? Like because Silicon Valley, the DNA is so powerful. I don't know, in my lifetime, it will get diminished, right? Like the early success, which comes from the Silicon Valley or the Intel and the HPs of the world, and then so much success after that, Stanford, all those things. So now, Dylan, we come to our last segment of the podcast.
Okay.
I'm going to give you a couple of options. You have to pick one, and there are no right or wrong answer, by the way, right?
Okay.
So we call this round the sprint round, Dylan. Okay. And you have to pick one. Strategy or speed?
Speed.
All right. People or process?
People.
Experiment or research?
Experiment? I think they're the same thing. Cheating, sorry.
Musk or Bezos?
Oh, they're just so different. I guess Musk? I don't know, just different.
Obsession or genius?
Obsession.
Invention or imagination?
Imagination.
Hard work or talent?
Hard work.
And the last one, kindness or smartness?
Kindness. But I have one last question for both of you, actually.
Yeah.
Speaking of sprint questions, this is a traditional Figma question that we ask a lot of people. And the question is, would you rather have raccoons for feet or muffins for hands?
Muffins for hands?
Yeah, raccoons for feet or muffins for hands.
Okay. I think I'll go with muffins for hands.
I'm gonna go with raccoons for feet. Yeah. Do we need to give reasons why, or is it just?
I think it'd be helpful for the audience. Yeah.
I use my hands for too many things to turn them into muffins. Plus, I'd eat them.
I love muffins, so I picked that answer.
I love it. Perfect.
Thanks for tuning in and listening. You can find Why in the Valley wherever you get your podcasts, available now on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and more.